Welcome back to this retrospective on Disney villains. Today we're checking out some more of the classic shorts characters, so let's cut straight to the chase with the Big Bad Wolf. The Big Bad Wolf is probably one of the most iconic fairy tale characters to ever exist, partially because he's in not one but two very famous stories, Little Red Riding Hood and the Three Little Pigs. The older story, Little Red Riding Hood, dates back to the 10th century and has many variations, but the gist is basically the same in most versions, the story we all know. A little girl is traveling to deliver food to her sick grandmother. She encounters a wolf in the woods and tells him where she's headed. The wolf beats her to the grandma's house, eats the grandma, or locks her somewhere in the later toned-down editions, and dresses in her clothes. Little Red and the wolf have that famous back and forth, and the wolf eats her. In some versions, a huntsman saves Little Red and Grandma. In others, it just ends there. There is a not-so-subtle cautionary element to the tale about not trusting strangers, and also a not-so-subtle sexual element, which was taken to its logical conclusion in the Into the Woods musical, where the wolf is explicitly portrayed as a sexual predator, in addition to being a traditional carnivorous predator. One particularly gruesome version of the fairy tale even has the wolf feed Little Red her grandmother's flesh and blood. Perhaps to alleviate the horror a bit, this version has Little Red escape herself. She claims to need to use the bathroom and makes a hasty exit. The Three Little Pigs is generally less disturbing unless you're a pig. It dates back only to the 19th century and has less variations. Three little pigs build houses, one of straw, one of sticks, and one of bricks. The Big Bad Wolf goes from house to house demanding to be let in and blowing the house down when refused. In some versions he eats the first two pigs, in others they escape to the brick house. The brick house is sturdily built and does not get blown down so easily. The wolf attempts to come down the chimney, but gets boiled in a huge pot waiting at the fireplace, and a valuable lesson about hard work and home security is learned by all. Disney chose to adapt The Three Little Pigs as a silly symphony cartoon in 1933. It faithfully retells the happier version of the story where all three pigs survive. The wolf, voiced by Billy Bletcher, is alluded to first in the catchy Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf song before sneaking onto the scene, drooling in anticipation at Fifer and Fiddler Pig. While he looks a little comical, he's portrayed as a proper threat. All the pig's bravado disappears instantly when he leers out from behind a tree. Not only is he good at the classic huffing and puffing, but the Disney cartoon adds his talent for disguises, perhaps inspired by the grandma scene in Little Red Riding Hood. When he really loses his temper at the end, the gloves are literally off, and he ends up naked and all fours in the final scene, driving home the vicious nature of the wolf. Cartoon gloves and suspenders will no longer give an illusion of humanity to him. Although the cartoon only ran at 8 minutes, it was incredibly well received when it first came out. The United States was in the Great Depression, and a story about three little guys who overcame their hardships through hard work and a good attitude really resonated with audiences. The song Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf became one of Disney's first big hits. Since there was a demand for more pig cartoons, the second one came out the next year. Despite being an adaptation of Little Red Riding Hood, a logical move to make, the cartoon was titled The Big Bad Wolf, perhaps because the song had been so popular. In addition to retelling the most famous part of the story with Little Red and her grandmother, the wolf also disguises himself as the good fairy of the forest. Instead of being cut open by a huntsman, Practical Pig fills the wolf's pants with popcorn and hot coals, giving him another painful and humiliating exit. In 1936, the Big Bad Wolf's unruly children made their first appearance in The Three Little Wolves. The Big Bad Wolf lures Fifer and Fiddler Pig to his house disguised as Little Bo Peep, with his sons acting as sheep. The little wolves prove to be as dangerous and bloodthirsty as their father, and Practical Pig once again has to bail his brothers out of this mess. Only one more proper Three Little Pigs cartoon would follow. While the first three were in the Silly Symphonies series, the 1939 cartoon, The Practical Pig, was listed as a Three Little Pigs cartoon, implying there would be more to follow. Despite having the best animation of the four Pigs cartoons, it was generally more of the same otherwise. The Big Bad Wolf disguises himself as a mermaid to capture Fifer and Fiddler, and Practical Pig uses one of his inventions to defeat the wolf. After this, Walt Disney would famously declare, "You can't top pigs with pigs," and would back down of any more pig sequels. Unless, of course, you count The Thrifty Pig from November 1941. Although the United States would not officially join World War II until the next month, the threat of war still loomed over everyone. The Canadian government commissioned Disney to make a series of propaganda shorts for them. One of them was a remake of the first Three Little Pigs cartoon, which mostly had reused animation, save for the Big Bad Wolf now being dressed in Nazi regalia. This time, the brick house is made of Canadian savings bonds. A little new animation was created for bricks being tossed at the wolf as he retreats. The only other classic cartoon to feature Old Big Bad was 1936's Mickey's Polo Team, where the wolf plays on a team with Mickey, Donald, and Goofy against a team of 1930s Hollywood celebrities. Aside from all of the cameos of Hollywood elite and Disney characters, I don't find it to be a terribly interesting short, and it follows in the tradition of many shorts of the time, and many to come, where Mickey's name is in the title, but the mouse barely does anything in the cartoon proper. I do like that the wolf's horse looks like him, though. The wolf would retire from cartoons for a while after this, although his comic career would flourish. Outside of classic characters like Mickey, Donald, and Scrooge McDuck, the Big Bad Wolf probably appeared in the most Disney comics. He even got the proper name of Zeke Midas Wolf, although he's still known as the Big Bad Wolf to most of the animals he terrorizes. In his first few stories, he was accompanied by the Three Little Wolves, and they were remakes and expansions of the original cartoons. In 1945, however, the Three Little Wolves were ditched for a single child character, Little Bad Wolf. Unlike the previous trio, Little Bad was a sweet, friendly, good-natured kid who was nothing like his father. In the first few stories, the Big Bad Wolf would try to get Little Bad to trap animals and act nasty in general, but Little Bad was simply unable to be evil like his dad wanted him to. A few stories later, and Little Bad met the Three Little Pigs for the first time, instantly becoming their best friend. The Little Bad Wolf stories might have never reached the adventurous heights of the Carl Barks Duck comics or the Floyd Gottfredson Mouse comics, but they're certainly enjoyable and fun. There's often an element of sadness to them, too. Little Bad is rejected by his father for being good, and despite being well-liked by the pigs and the forest animals as a whole, he never seems to truly feel he fits in, since any time he plays with his friends could potentially be, and often is, interrupted by the Big Bad Wolf trying to eat them. As nice as Little Bad is, he is also incredibly naive, eternally hoping his father will change his ways. Zeke knows this, and often tricks his son into believing he's gone straight, with Little Bad almost always taking the bait without thinking too hard about it. After Song of the South came out in 1946, the Brer characters were added to the mix. Zeke and Brer Fox sometimes worked together, while other times they appeared to hate each other, probably due to their unpleasant similarities. Brer Bear, meanwhile, was often on hand to beat the Big Bad Wolf senseless when he was angered, which was often, to the point that Brer Bear bursting onto the scene to clobber Zeke at the end of a story became something of a deus ex machina after a while. Zeke became the leader of the Foul Fellows Club, an organization of predators that consisted of mostly the evil Brer characters. Ironically, Foul Fellow from Pinocchio never joined, to my knowledge. Zeke's return to animation was in the 1992 animated series Raw Toonage, which felt like an attempt to adapt to the more zany, in-your-face cartoons that were rising in popularity. It was an anthology series that introduced US citizens to the character Marsupilami, and introduced the world to Bonkers D. Bobcat. It also included a few cartoons about Sebastian the Crab where he was pursued by Chef Louie, except they lived in modern times for some reason. It was a weird, uneven series, sometimes funny, sometimes trying a little too hard to imitate Tiny Toon Adventures. There have been a lot of great Disney cartoons over the years, but Raw Toonage simply wasn't one of them, and was cancelled after only 12 episodes. Oh right, I was talking about the Big Bad Wolf. He appeared in one cartoon sketch only called Porker's Court, where he was sued by the Three Little Pigs over being a slumlord and leasing terrible houses. Little Bad Wolf makes a cameo as well, looking nothing like his comic version. Full episodes of Raw Toonage are incredibly hard to come by, and I could only find a foreign dub of this one. Hey, look how radical and hip they made the Three Little Pigs! Aren't they da bomb, fellow kids? The Big Bad Wolf around this point was being voiced by Jim Cummings, who you might remember from the previous episode, having also taken over as Pete, another Billy Bletcher character. Big Bad's final notable appearance thus far was in the House of Mouse series in 2001. He appeared in one episode as the musical guest Big Bad Wolf Daddy. According to Ludwig von Drake, the wolf's famous huffing and puffing stems from an irrational hatred of doors, which is confirmed when throughout the episode, the mere sight of a door caused the wolf to become enraged. With the Three Little Pigs as his backup, the wolf sings a jazzy version of Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf. The Bimbettes from Beauty and the Beast join in, while Gaston most likely plans on mounting the wolf's head on his wall later on. An even more notable appearance on the show came later, when the Big Bad Wolf starred in one of the club's cartoons along with the Three Little Pigs and Little Bad Wolf. Here, Little Bad was dressed in modern clothes and voiced by Sam Gafaldi. It closely followed the classic comic formula of the big bad wolf stalking the pigs, with Little Bad caught in the middle. Interestingly, in the club segments of that episode, the original 3 little wolves are seen as dancers. Go figure. While the big bad wolf hasn't appeared in animation recently, there are still comics being written featuring him and his son today, and probably will be for a very long time, much to the pigs' dismay. Mortimer Mouse. Mortimer Mouse was more or less born from an inside joke. When Walt Disney conceived of a heroic mouse character for his cartoons, he wanted to use the name Mortimer. His wife Lillian didn't like the name, and suggested Mickey instead, which, as history has shown us, was the right move. The name Mortimer Mouse was used in the 1936 cartoon Mickey's Rival as a bizarro Mickey of sorts. Mortimer was tall, rat-like, and unpleasant, all in sharp contrast to Mickey. He is introduced here as one of Minnie's old friends, and possibly a romantic flame, although it's never made explicitly clear. Throughout the first portion of the cartoon, Mortimer plays nasty pranks on Mickey and shows off for Minnie. When he enrages a bull, Mortimer runs off, leaving Mickey to save the day instead, and prove why he's the better mouse. Mortimer only has about 5 minutes of screen time in the 8-minute cartoon, but they pull out all the stops to make sure the audience hates him just as much as Mickey does. Mortimer's voice, according to a few different online sites I found, was provided by someone named Sonny Dawson, although I can't find virtually anything else about Mr. Dawson anywhere, so who knows. In the Mickey Mouse comic strip, a character similar to Mortimer had been introduced in a 1930s story arc named Mr. Slicker. He was again a tall, rat-like character who was interested in Minnie. Slicker attempted to frame Mickey for several thefts, only to be caught in the end. In a later 1941 story arc called Love Trouble, Mickey returned home from one of his many adventures to find Minnie, who he had neglected to write to or contact, had found another lover, Montmorency Rodin, who again resembles Mortimer. Monty continuously one-ups Mickey with his social elite status, and Mickey in turn begins dating a social elite mouse named Millicent. In the end, Monty is revealed to be a fraud who puts on airs, and Millicent, get ready for this, is actually Mickey's cousin Madeline, and the whole thing was a sham to make Minnie jealous, when she was dating Monty to make Mickey jealous and... Look, no one actually comes out of the story looking like a great person. And no, Mickey never kissed his cousin or anything, because I know some of you were probably wondering. Despite the Mickey's Rival short getting significant airtime on TV cartoon compilations and showing up on a few VHS releases in the 80s and 90s, I get the feeling that Mortimer would still be a somewhat unknown character in the Disney pantheon had he not been revived in later years. In 1999, Mortimer made his first appearance in animation after a very long hiatus as Minnie's boss in Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas, voiced by Jeff Bennett. He wasn't a real villain here, he was just an out-of-touch CEO. That might be villainous enough for some people, but he doesn't actually do anything malicious. Not so in his next appearances. Now voiced by Maurice LaMarche, Mortimer made regular appearances as an antagonist in Mickey's Mouseworks and House of Mouse. In addition to being a sexist serial harasser of women, Mortimer more actively meddles with the lives of Mickey and Minnie, even framing Mickey for theft in one cartoon. It gets a little sad at a few points, since no one, not even the Disney villains, seem to like Mortimer one bit in any scene he appears in. The guy has virtually no friends, and yet he's done it all to himself. Mortimer appeared a few times in the toned-down preschooler series as well. In the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, he appeared as a supervillain who went around shrinking landmarks and people, although it was revealed that it was because he was lonely. In Mickey and the Road to Racers, he was an arrogant stuntman named Morty McCool, who was not nearly as nice as his TV persona implied. In the recent Mickey Mouse shorts, Mortimer was voiced once by Paul Rudish, the series creator, and once by Jeff Bennett returning to the role. He was more of an overt bully here, relying less on mental manipulation and more on physical violence. While no one likes Mortimer as a person, he makes for a fun foil to Mickey, and is the kind of character we all love to hate. I'm happy they decided to make him into such a fun character, and it gives good incentive for Disney writers to check the massive archives. You never know when you might find a good forgotten character to reuse. Butch the Bulldog. Obviously, cartoons do not always, or even often, reflect reality, so it shouldn't be surprised to learn that despite what years of classic animation has taught us, English bulldogs are not ferocious. Countless times they've been portrayed as vicious beasts, but the average bulldog would probably leave you covered in drool and slobber rather than injuries. They're really very friendly, albeit sometimes lazy, dogs. Keeping up with the angry bulldog stereotype, is Pluto's longtime nemesis Butch. While he is bigger and stronger than Pluto, Pluto almost always comes out on top thanks to a combination of wit and luck. Butch first appeared in the 1940 cartoon Bone Trouble, where his bone was stolen by Pluto, who I thought was supposed to be the hero here, but in this cartoon, he's the one in the wrong. Butch is meaner, but it was his bone first. It's almost kind of weird that Pluto wins in the end of this one. Since Pluto and Butch function as pets in the Disneyverse, their cartoons are generally on the smaller scale of things. They'll battle over a bone, a sausage, the affections of a dachshund, but nothing major. Except for a 1946 cartoon called The Purloined Pup, where Butch straight up kidnaps a St. Bernard puppy for ransom. This is probably the only actively evil thing we've ever seen Butch do. Yes, he's been shown to be a dangerous dog with a short fuse, but there are plenty of dogs like that in real life, and none of them are evil. Purloined Pup is a strange little cartoon, showing the dogs acting not quite like the everyday pets we usually see in the series, but not quite human enough to make their actions seem normal. That puppy is adorable, though. The only cartoon where Butch was pitted against someone that wasn't Pluto was in Figaro and Frankie. Figaro, the cat from Pinocchio, was apparently popular enough to warrant his own brief cartoon series. In this one, Figaro and Butch compete to eat Minnie's pet bird Frankie, with Figaro's better self prevailing. Figaro defeats Butch with a flower pot to the head and saves the little bird. Interestingly, Butch appeared to want to eat Figaro too at one point. In the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse series, Butch was revealed to be Pete's dog, which is kind of a cool reveal, even if it doesn't come as much as a surprise. Like everyone in that show, Butch was portrayed as being a lot friendlier, with any rivalry with Pluto being healthy and sportsmanlike. For once, Butch was acting a bit more like a real bulldog. Bent Tail. When you think of cartoon coyotes, Wile from Looney Tunes is probably the first one to come to mind. For a short time, however, Disney had their own scheming coyote character, who predated Wile by 4 years. Bent Tail the Coyote was another nemesis of Pluto, and appeared in 4 shorts. In each one, he would attempt to steal livestock or food, all guarded by Pluto. In 3 of the 4 cartoons, he was accompanied by his adorable pup, Bent Tail Jr. The 2 coyotes had a fun dynamic. Bent Tail would always have his eyes on the prize, and come up with the planning. Junior, meanwhile, seemed to be in his own little world, and when he was paying attention to his father's directions, he would still often get distracted. Despite seeing a pen full of lambs ready to be eaten, Junior seemed to have an appetite for Pluto, and had to be stopped from biting the dog and alerting Pluto to their presence. Despite being fierce predators and a real-life danger to livestock, Bent Tail and his son were too silly to ever be taken seriously, and I can only think of a few brief moments where Bent Tail came off as somewhat intimidating. There's no doubt that he could and would eat the adorable lambs if he was able, but there's always something roguish and lovable about him that seemed to distract from that aspect. In 1961, a TV special aired as part of the Walt Disney Presents anthology called The Coyotes' Lament, which featured all 4 of the original Bent Tail shorts, with a new narration and a framing device. As a quartet of coyotes sing on a hilltop about their troubles, we see a now elderly Bent Tail, the grown-up Junior, and Junior's own pup. Bent Tail and Junior narrate their exploits to the little coyote while discussing man's invasion of the West and the domestication of dogs. Suddenly, the villainous predators didn't seem all that villainous anymore. It was a rare time during Walt Disney's lifetime that the antagonistic characters were humanized and meant to be empathized with. I cannot find any record of who voiced the coyotes in the special, but it was later redubbed in the 90s as Disney's Coyote Tales, with Jim Cummings voicing Bent Tail and Junior. I might as well say now that over the course of this special, you're going to be seeing a lot of repeat voice actors, and I think Jim Cummings might be seen the most. He doesn't only voice villains, I mean, for goodness sake, he's the current voice of Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, but he has a real talent for it. The Phantom Blot. I've stated this before in previous videos, but there is a massive amount of Disney comics out there, with their own characters and continuities. Some very well-known Disney characters started in the comics, most notably Scrooge McDuck. Most of the beloved characters by artist and writer Carl Barks were featured in the DuckTales cartoon, so I'll probably hold off on talking about them until a later episode. However, one very enduring villain was created by Floyd Gottfredson for the Mickey Mouse comic strip, the one and only Phantom Blot. Mickey fought his fair share of foes in the daily papers. Pete was, of course, the most frequent bad guy. There was also Sylvester Shyster, a crooked lawyer, and Eli Squinch, a con man. While those latter two have popped up from time to time in comics today, the Phantom Blot left the biggest mark of the new villains. Draped in a black cloak with two small white eyes poking out, the Blot looks both simplistic and kinda creepy. In his first appearance in a 1941 storyline, the Blot was stealing and destroying a certain type of camera in massive quantities. The police were baffled by this competent criminal who was devoting so much time to seemingly nothing, and of course Mickey Mouse was called onto the scene. After many chases, close calls, and death traps, Mickey brought the Blot to justice where he was unmasked, revealing his face that was allegedly modeled after Walt Disney himself. The Blot was searching for a chemical formula hidden in one of the cameras that he planned to use for evil purposes. Gottfredson never used the Blot again, and aside from a few remakes of the first story, the Blot had only one other appearance for a while, in 1955. Other artists realized the great potential of the character, and the Blot began to show up frequently as a villain from the 60s and onward. Today he's one of the main Disney Comics bad guys. Although he's better known in Europe than he is in the US, over here the Blot did manage to have his own comic book series that ran for 7 issues. The Blot is of course named for his resemblance to an ink blot, and to keep up the theme, he signs any letters he sends, all of a threatening nature of course, with a splotch of ink. Unlike the Beagle Boys or Pete, the Blot is usually played straight and as a genuine threat to the heroes and is not to be taken lightly. He's out to rule the world and enslave the entire population. In his first outing with Mickey, he showed just how determined he really was to bump off anyone that stood in the way. Mickey was captured 3 times in the story arc, and narrowly escaped each one mostly by luck. The most impressive moment came from Mickey managing to escape one trap, only to fall into a second backup trap. Even if neither of them killed Mickey, that's still pretty impressive. Although the Blot has no true friends, we did meet his daughter once, nicknamed the Phantom Brat, although not in the story itself. The little girl, thanks to the Blot's slanting of the truth, believed her father was the hero and Mickey was the villain. She only had 2 small appearances and hasn't been seen since, so hopefully it means she hasn't followed in her dad's life of crime. It did show a trace of humanity within the Blot, so she still counts for something. The Blot has also had an unwanted romantic stalker in the form of Mad Madam Mim from The Sword and the Stone, who became very popular in the comics after her movie came out. Of course, she'll be discussed in her own episode later on. In the original DuckTales cartoon, the Blot appeared once in the episode All Ducks on Deck, trying to steal secret military weapons. He was voiced by Frank Welker, who has one of the most extensive list of voice acting credits I think anyone will ever have. While it was fun to see the Blot in his animation debut, he was portrayed as an over-the-top villain who constantly felt the need to remind everyone how evil he was, rather than the suave, cool-headed Blot from the comics. This version of the character felt a little too over-the-top and was simply not menacing enough. Tellingly, this was his only appearance in the series. In Mickey Mouse Works and the House of Mouse, the Phantom Blot appeared a few times voiced by John O'Hurley. He was much closer to his comic counterpart in these cartoons. In his first and most major appearance, he stole a global credit card from Ludwig von Drake and almost made off with all the money in the world. It really did feel like something straight out of the classic comics, complete with a standard death trap, and was one of the most enjoyable Mouseworks shorts as a result. The fight scene at the end of the short, where he battles Mickey on a blimp, is particularly memorable, especially considering Mickey is armed with nothing but a roll of packing tape. The other short the Blot appeared in had him stealing the world's colors to make himself the Phantom Rainbow. Compared to his other appearance, he was sillier and less threatening, but the whole cartoon had something of a tongue-in-cheek feel to it, so this could have been intentional. He also appeared in one of the wraparound segments of the House of Mouse, where he managed to single-handedly kidnap virtually everyone in the club. As you can see, the Phantom Blot subscribes to the go big or go home mentality. The Blot is set to appear in Season 3 of the DuckTales reboot, though as of this recording, he has not made a major appearance yet. I'm looking forward to him in this cartoon, as I'm personally hoping John O'Hurley will return to voice him. I should also make mention of the Blot from Epic Mickey, although this is technically a completely different character, who is an homage to the comic villain. This creature is made of ink and thinner, and is set out to destroy the Wasteland, home to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and countless other forgotten characters. In a Norwegian comic, the 2 Blots actually did meet. It was never officially published in English, however, and I am unable to find a full translation at the time. While he might not be as well known as some of the classic Disney characters, at least not in the United States, the Phantom Blot is a wonderful foe that will hopefully get more recognition over here someday. And I'm not really sure where else to work it in, but there's a Norwegian comic strip called Nemi about an impulsive goth girl, and one of her character traits is that she has a crush on the Blot to the point of having romantic fantasies about him. Pop culture references like that have to count for something, right? It's a funny comic, too. That's it for this round of villains. The next time I do one of these videos, we're going to the movie villains, starting with the Queen from Snow White. See you next time!